My girlfriend makes thousands selling photos of herself online, and when I confronted her, she said she'll do whatever it takes to keep our lifestyle. My name's Jake, 26M, and up until recently, I thought my relationship with Emily, 24F, was solid. We'd been together for 3 years, living together for 1, and things seemed like they were falling into place. We had a cozy apartment, and while neither of us had high-paying jobs, we made do with what we had. I worked as a mechanic at a local shop, and she was a waitress at a trendy downtown restaurant. Life wasn't perfect, but we were happy, or so I thought. It all started with a couple of strange bills. I was going through our shared account to balance the rent, and there it was, a charge for a fancy lingerie store. It was way more expensive than the kind of stuff she usually bought, and I was confused because I hadn't seen her wearing anything new around me. When I asked her about it, she shrugged it off, saying it was a gift for a friend's bachelorette party. I didn't think much of it at the time. I trusted her after all. But then there were more charges. High-end makeup, spa treatments, and even some weird recurring payment from a site I didn't recognize. It didn't sit right with me, but I didn't want to come off as controlling. So I let it go, thinking maybe she was just treating herself a bit more than usual. After all, who was I to question where she spent her money? She worked hard, and if she wanted to spoil herself, that was her right. Then one night, I came home early from the shop, hoping to surprise her. I picked up a bottle of her favorite wine, and I was looking forward to a quiet evening together. But when I walked in, the apartment was eerily quiet. Usually, she'd be cooking or playing music, but not that night. I headed toward the bedroom, and that's when I heard her voice. Low and sultry, like she was talking to someone. It was odd, so I pushed the door open a crack and peered inside. She was sitting on the bed, her laptop open, wearing that same lingerie I'd never seen her in. Her voice was soft, seductive, and she was posing in a way that made my stomach twist. I watched in stunned silence as she angled the camera, clearly putting on a show. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. Was she doing this for someone else? I must have made some noise because she suddenly glanced over at the door and froze. Our eyes met, and the shock on her face mirrored the turmoil in my chest. She scrambled to close the laptop, her face turning pale. Jake, I didn't think you'd be home so early, she stammered, clearly trying to think of a way to explain herself. What the hell is going on, Emily? I asked, feeling my hands tremble. Who were you talking to? She looked down, avoiding my gaze. Jake, please, let me explain. It's not what it looks like. But I knew that line too well. It was always what it looked like. She took a deep breath, visibly gathering herself. It's just, I've been selling some pictures online. It's harmless, Jake. It's just a way to make extra money. You know how tight things have been. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Harmless? You call this harmless? You're sitting here in lingerie talking to strangers on the internet, and you think that's harmless? She sighed, crossing her arms defensively. Jake, you don't understand. This pays way more than my job at the restaurant. I'm making thousands every month. I'm doing it for us, for our lifestyle. Our lifestyle. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. You're doing this for us. Are you serious right now? If you wanted extra money, you could just talk to me. We could have figured something out together. Her eyes turned cold, and she dropped a sympathetic tone. Look, Jake, it's my body, and I'll do what I want with it. I don't need your permission. This isn't the 1950s. I'm just trying to make our lives better. I felt a surge of anger rising in me. Better? You think this makes our lives better? You're selling yourself to strangers on the internet. How is that supposed to make anything better? She just stared at me, unflinching, like she'd already rehearsed this argument in her head. I can't work a dead-end job forever, Jake. This is a way out. A way for us to actually live instead of just scraping by. Why can't you just accept that? I shook my head, feeling more betrayed with each passing second. Why didn't you tell me? Why hide it if it's so harmless? You've been sneaking around, lying to me, and for what? For some quick cash. Because I knew you'd react like this, she snapped, her voice filled with frustration. You're so judgmental, Jake. You act like you're above it all, but you don't understand the pressure I feel. I want nice things. I want a better life, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get there. I couldn't believe the person standing in front of me. This wasn't the Emily I thought I knew. The girl I'd fallen in love with was kind, hardworking, and honest. But the woman standing in front of me was cold, calculated, and unrecognizable. I left the apartment that night, not even bothering to pack a bag. I needed time to think, to process what I'd just discovered. I drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring past me as I tried to make sense of everything. How had it come to this? How had our relationship, something I thought was built on love and trust, turned into this nightmare? And yet, as the hours passed, I felt the anger fading, replaced by a gnawing sense of uncertainty. I had to know more. Why had she really done this? Was it just about the money, or was there something deeper driving her? I needed answers, and I knew I'd have to confront her again if I wanted any kind of closure. After a night of restless driving and battling with my own thoughts, I decided I needed to confront Emily. There was too much I still didn't understand, and I couldn't let this go without getting to the bottom of it. The next morning, I returned to our apartment, my head spinning with anger, confusion, and a weird sense of curiosity. Why had she chosen to do this? Did she really believe selling herself online was the only way to make ends meet? When I walked in, she was sitting on the couch, as if waiting for me. Her face was puffy, her eyes red from crying. But I wasn't ready to feel sorry for her. Not yet. I took a seat across from her, keeping my expression as calm as I could manage. "All right, Emily. I need you to tell me everything. No more excuses, no more half-truths. I want to know exactly what you've been doing and why." I crossed my arms, staring her down. She hesitated, looking down at her hands, which were clenched together tightly. "Jake, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to get this far. It started as a way to make a little extra cash. I thought I'd just post a few photos and be done with it." I raised an eyebrow, not buying it. "A few photos? Emily, I saw you on camera last night. That's not just a few photos. You were talking to someone, putting on a show. This has gone way beyond what you're telling me." She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Okay, fine. Yes, it's more than just photos. I set up a whole page. People paid to see me, live. It's lucrative, Jake. I'm making more doing this in a night than I'm making a week at the restaurant." "And who are these people? Are they random strangers? Because I heard names last night. Names of people I recognize. Don't tell me you're selling this to people we know." She bit her lip, her face pale. "Some of them, yeah. A few guys we went to school with, people from around the neighborhood. They found me online and, well, they were willing to pay." The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I could feel the bile rising in my throat. "You're selling yourself to our friends. To people we see at the grocery store, people who we might run into on the street." She flinched, looking like she wanted to shrink into the couch. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never planned for them to find me, but when they did, the money was good, Jake. We talked about wanting more out of life, and I thought this would help us get there." I shook my head, trying to process her twisted logic. "At what cost, Emily? You're selling your dignity for a few extra bucks. And you're dragging me down with you. What happens when word gets out? What happens when people start talking about how my girlfriend is selling nudes and live shows to the whole town?" She looked away, and for a moment, I thought she might actually feel guilty. But then she met my gaze, her eyes steely. "Jake, you don't understand. I'm doing this for us. I'm making real money here. Money that could change our lives. If you weren't so stuck in your ways, you'd see this for the opportunity it is." "An opportunity?" I scoffed, barely able to keep my voice steady. "This isn't an opportunity, Emily. It's desperation. You're selling out our relationship, our privacy, just for some quick cash. And you think that's okay?" She shrugged, crossing her arms. "It's better than living paycheck to paycheck, barely scraping by. I don't want that life, Jake. I want nice things. I want to go places, see the world. This is a way to make that happen." I stared at her, struggling to reconcile the woman in front of me with the girl I'd fallen in love with. "And what about us, Emily? What about our future? How are we supposed to move forward when you're doing this? How am I supposed to trust you?" She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please, Jake. Trust? What do you even know about trust? You're so stuck in your little bubble, so afraid of stepping outside the lines. You'd rather live a boring life than take any risks. Well, I'm done living like that. Her words stung, and I felt the anger bubbling up inside me. You think I don't take risks? Emily, I'm here because I loved you, because I believed we were building something together. But it's clear now that you were only looking out for yourself. She smirked, leaning back on the couch, her arms crossed. Maybe I was. Maybe it's time I start thinking about what I want, instead of just worrying about how you're going to react. I'm done apologizing for wanting more. I clenched my fists, feeling a wave of frustration and helplessness wash over me. So, what now, Emily? You're just going to keep doing this? Keep selling yourself online and pretending it's all for the greater good? She shrugged, her eyes cold. Maybe I will, and maybe you should get used to it, Jake. Because I'm not stopping. Not now. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. Fine, Emily. If that's how you want it, then I'm out. I can't be part of this, whatever this is. I deserve better than someone who values money over our relationship. She laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Good luck, Jake. Go ahead and leave, but don't come crawling back when you realize that your high and mighty morals don't pay the bills. I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me, my mind reeling. How had things come to this? How had the woman I loved become someone I could barely recognize? I felt betrayed, shattered, and utterly lost. Leaving Emily behind was supposed to be my fresh start, a clean break from the toxicity she'd brought into our lives. But it wasn't as easy as I'd thought. Everywhere I turned, reminders of her were lurking. Whispers from mutual friends, concerned looks from family members, and the gut-wrenching feeling that I hadn't really escaped anything at all. She was still out there, still pulling strings in ways I couldn't quite understand yet. I tried to focus on work, on keeping busy, but the nagging doubts wouldn't leave me alone. Friends started mentioning things, dropping hints that they'd seen something online, that they'd heard whispers about my ex's little side hustle. It wasn't just local gossip. It was spreading, reaching people I barely knew, and I could feel the shame creeping into every corner of my life. It felt like everyone knew something about me that I didn't, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. One evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an old college buddy, Rick. We hadn't spoken in months, so it was strange to see his name pop up. But as soon as I opened the message, my stomach dropped. Rick, hey man, saw some pics online. Isn't that your ex? Thought you should know before it gets worse. Check this out. Attached was a link. I hesitated, my finger hovering over it as my heart pounded in my chest. I knew I shouldn't click, knew that whatever was waiting for me on the other side was bound to hurt. But I had to know. I had to understand what was really happening. When I opened the link, I was greeted with a page full of thumbnails, each one worse than the last. There she was, Emily, in all kinds of compromising positions, with titles that made my skin crawl. But that wasn't the worst part. I scrolled down and noticed the names of people who left comments, usernames I recognized. Old classmates, guys from the neighborhood, even a couple of coworkers. They'd been watching her, paying her, and leaving lewd comments for the world to see. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. My mind raced with questions. How many of them knew it was my girlfriend? Or rather, my ex, who they were paying to see? Did they even care? Or were they reveling in the knowledge that they were getting a peek into something that should have been private, something that had once been ours? I slammed my laptop shut, breathing heavily. The walls felt like they were closing in, and I needed air. I stumbled outside, gulping in the cold night air, trying to calm myself down. But the images, the words, kept flashing in my mind, each one a knife to the gut. This was more than just a betrayal. It was a complete and utter invasion of my life, a violation that went deeper than I could have imagined. Over the next few days, I tried to push it aside, to focus on anything but Emily and her sordid new career. But the damage had been done. People started treating me differently, whispering behind my back, casting sideways glances whenever I walked into a room. I couldn't escape it. I could feel the judgment in every conversation, the pity in every look. It was like I'd become a walking punchline, the guy whose girlfriend had sold herself to the entire neighborhood. Then, one day, I got a call from my boss, asking me to come into his office. The tone in his voice made it clear that this wasn't just a routine check-in. When I arrived, he was sitting behind his desk, a grim expression on his face. "Jake, have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of him. I sat down, my mind racing. He cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "Listen, this is awkward, and I'm not sure how to say it, but there's been some talk around the office. People are saying things about your ex-girlfriend, and it's starting to affect the workplace environment." I felt my cheeks burn, a mix of anger and humiliation bubbling up inside me. What does my ex have to do with work? I've kept my personal life separate from my job. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I understand that, Jake, but it's not that simple. This has gone beyond just personal gossip. People are sharing links. It's become a distraction, and frankly, it's reflecting poorly on the company." My mind reeled. They were sharing links. At work, it was one thing to deal with this mess on my own, but now it was bleeding into my career, threatening everything I'd worked for. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my composure. "So what are you saying? That I'm responsible for her actions? That my job is on the line because of what she's doing?" He looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. "I'm not saying it's fair, Jake, but I have to consider the bigger picture. The company's reputation is at stake, and I need you to understand the position we're in. Maybe take a few days off, let things die down. Consider it a cooling off period." I stood up, barely able to contain my rage. A cooling off period. This is my life we're talking about. I've worked here for years, and now I'm being pushed out because of something I had no control over. He raised his hands defensively. "I'm not pushing you out, Jake. I'm just saying that right now, things are tense. Take a few days, clear your head, and we'll reassess." I left his office feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. My entire life was unraveling, one piece at a time, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I went home, slamming the door behind me, pacing back and forth as the anger boiled over. Emily had ruined everything. My relationship, my reputation, even my job. And for what? A few extra bucks, a taste of the high life she'd always craved. That night, I sat down and started drafting a message to her. I needed answers, closure, something to help me make sense of the chaos she'd thrown me into. But as I typed, I realized there was no point. She didn't care. She'd made her choices, and I was nothing more than collateral damage in her twisted pursuit of fame and fortune. Instead, I decided to do something drastic. I dug through my old contacts and found a friend who worked in IT. If Emily was going to destroy my life, then I needed to know everything. I needed to expose the depths of her betrayal, to understand just how far she'd gone. I called my friend, explaining the situation, asking for his help. He agreed reluctantly, warning me that I might not like what I found. But at this point, I didn't care. I was already living in a nightmare. The truth couldn't be worse than the lies. Over the next few days, my friend Tom helped me dig into Emily's digital life. He was hesitant at first, but I convinced him that I needed this, that it was the only way I could move on. Tom had a knack for finding things most people wouldn't know how to access, and together, we unraveled the dark, twisted layers of Emily's secret world. The more we uncovered, the deeper her deception went. Emily hadn't just been selling photos to strangers, she had multiple accounts on different platforms, each one catering to a different fantasy, each one more degrading than the last. And the worst part, she wasn't just selling to anonymous strangers online. We found that she'd been privately messaging several guys in our own community, men who were either friends of mine or people I saw in town on a regular basis. Tom handed me his laptop one evening, an apologetic look in his eyes. "You sure you want to see this, Jake? It's bad." I nodded, my jaw set. "I need to know." He pulled up a conversation between Emily and one of my neighbors, a guy I'd known since high school. They were chatting about their arrangements. Not just pictures, but meetups, videos, and things that made my stomach turn. She'd been meeting with him in places I recognized, places we'd been together, places that were now tainted by her lies. I felt sick, but I kept reading, each new message tearing a fresh wound in my gut. In one of the exchanges, she'd mentioned our apartment, talking about times she'd brought men over while I was out of town for work. She'd used my bed, my space, and laughed about how clueless I was. I could barely read the words, my hands shaking with a mixture of fury and disgust. She'd flaunted her deceit, and I'd been completely oblivious. Then we hit the jackpot. Tom found her main account, a private page that required a subscription to access, but with a few tricks, he managed to get us in. There were videos, dozens of them, filmed all around our apartment. She turned my home into a set, using the rooms, the furniture, even my clothes as props in her twisted performances. I felt a sense of violation so intense it nearly brought me to tears. She'd taken everything I'd built, everything we'd shared, and turned it into a spectacle for her own gain. I thought back to all the times I'd left for business trips, all the late nights I'd spent working, thinking she was home alone, waiting for me. How naive I'd been. I'd trusted her with everything, and she turned my life into a mockery. As I sat there, staring at the screen, I realized I couldn't stay silent. Emily had taken so much from me, and I couldn't let her get away with it. She'd ruined my reputation, jeopardized my career, and humiliated me in ways I never thought possible. I had to make sure people knew the truth, that they saw her for who she really was. "Tom, can you give me copies of these?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, laced with a cold resolve. He nodded, concern etched on his face. "Are you sure, man? This is pretty intense." I met his gaze, my expression hardened. I'm done letting her walk all over me. I've lost too much already. She wants to play the victim. Fine. But she doesn't get to hide the truth anymore. Tom spent the next hour gathering everything, screenshots, videos, messages. I knew it was risky, that this might blow back on me, but I was beyond caring. Emily had crossed lines I couldn't forgive, and I needed people to see the real her, the side she'd hidden from everyone else. The next morning, I posted everything anonymously on a local forum, tagging it with keywords that would catch people's attention. I attached a brief explanation detailing how she'd lied, manipulated, and betrayed me, how she'd used my home as her personal playground. I didn't include her name, but I knew it wouldn't take long for people to connect the dots. I wanted her to feel the same shame and humiliation I'd endured to watch as her perfect little facade crumbled around her. The response was swift. Within hours, the post had hundreds of comments, people expressing shock, disgust, and pity. Some claimed they'd always suspected something was off about her, while others defended her, calling me bitter and vindictive. But I didn't care about the opinions. I'd put the truth out there, and that was enough for me. Later that day, I started receiving messages from mutual friends, people who had seen the post and were horrified by what they'd read. A few were supportive, offering words of encouragement, but most were simply curious, looking for more dirt, eager to pry into the mess Emily had created. I ignored them all, refusing to engage, determined to distance myself from the chaos. But then, Emily showed up at my door, eyes red, tears streaming down her face. She looked like a wreck, and for a moment, I felt a pang of something, regret maybe, or pity. But then I remembered the conversations I'd read, the videos I'd watched, and any sympathy I might felt evaporated. "How could you?" she sobbed, her voice breaking. "How could you do this to me?" I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Are you serious? After everything you've done, you're really going to stand here and play the victim?" She shook her head, wiping her eyes. "You don't understand. I did what I had to do. I was desperate. You weren't there for me, Jake. I needed someone, and you were always too busy with work, too wrapped up in your own life to notice." I laughed, the sound cold and hollow. "So that justifies lying to me, humiliating me, selling yourself to everyone in town while pretending to be committed to me? You made your choices, Emily. Don't stand here and act like this is my fault." Her face twisted, a flash of anger breaking through the tears. "You think you're so perfect. You think you've done nothing wrong? You drove me to this. You made me feel like I was nothing, like I was just some accessory you could ignore whenever you felt like it." I clenched my fists, my own anger bubbling to the surface. "I gave you everything, Emily. I trusted you, and you threw it all away for what? A quick buck? Some cheap thrill? You don't get to pin this on me. This is your mess, and now everyone knows it." She took a step back, her expression shifting from anger to despair. "I didn't want it to end like this, Jake. I never meant to hurt you." I shook my head, my heart hardened. "Well, you did, and now you get to live with it." Without another word, I closed the door, shutting her out of my life for good. As I stood there, breathing heavily, I felt a strange sense of relief, a weight lifting from my shoulders. I knew the road ahead would be messy, that the fallout would follow me for a long time. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was finally free from her poison. After slamming the door in Emily's face, I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. But I knew this wasn't over. Emily had always been manipulative, and I knew she wouldn't take this humiliation lying down. Part of me wanted to believe that she would just disappear from my life, but another part, the part that knew her too well, sensed she was far from done. I barely had time to gather my thoughts before my phone started buzzing. It was Tom, calling to let me know that Emily had begun spreading rumors around town, painting me as some unhinged, vengeful ex out to ruin her life. She claimed I'd fabricated the entire story to get back at her for leaving me, that I was nothing more than a bitter ex with a grudge. People were already talking, and a few had even posted online, accusing me of harassment and stalking. "Jake, man, she's got people believing her," Tom said, his voice laced with concern. "You need to be careful. This could turn ugly." "She's lying to protect herself, Tom. She'll do anything to save face," I replied, frustration boiling in my veins. "Yeah, I get that," he said. "But she's got connections. I've seen her work the room. She's got half the town wrapped around her finger. You need to be ready for whatever she throws your way." The weight of his words sank in. Emily was already manipulating the narrative, twisting the truth to suit her own needs. I realized that exposing her might have backfired, that she would stop at nothing to protect her image. I'd underestimated just how far she'd go. Over the next few days, Emily's smear campaign grew. She convinced people that I was abusive, that I'd spied on her and violated her privacy. She even claimed I'd fabricated evidence, manipulating screenshots and videos to make her look bad. It felt like I was drowning in a tide of lies, struggling to breathe as she spun her web of deceit. Friends started ghosting me, neighbors gave me cold stares, and the people I thought would have my back fell silent. And then came the real blow. A lawsuit. I received a notice that Emily was suing me for defamation, claiming emotional distress, invasion of privacy, and loss of income due to the false allegations I'd made against her. The irony of it all was sickening. I was the one who had been betrayed, yet now I was the one being dragged through the mud, forced to defend myself against her accusations. The lawsuit wasn't just a tactic to hurt me financially. It was a power play. She wanted to silence me to make sure I couldn't retaliate any further. The thought of going to court against her was daunting, but I refused to back down. I'd seen too much, endured too much, to let her get away with this. I hired a lawyer determined to fight back. I gathered all the evidence I'd collected, the messages, the videos, everything that proved her lies. But as we prepared for the case, I received another message, one that sent a chill down my spine. It was from an anonymous number, a simple message that read, "Drop the case, or you'll regret it." I stared at the words, a knot forming in my stomach. I knew it was Emily, or someone working with her, trying to intimidate me into submission. But I wasn't about to give in. I'd already lost so much, and I was determined to see this through, no matter the cost. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal battles, media coverage, and relentless harassment. Emily had weaponized every tool at her disposal, dragging my name through the mud and turning the town against me. She made public statements, tearfully recounting how I'd ruined her life, how I'd spread lies about her to cover up my own insecurities. She painted herself as the victim, a poor woman targeted by a vindictive ex who couldn't handle rejection. But despite her efforts, there were cracks in her story, and people began to notice. A few brave souls reached out, people who'd been burned by Emily in the past, who knew the truth about her manipulative ways. They shared their own experiences, stories of betrayal and deceit, and slowly the tide began to turn. It wasn't enough to clear my name completely, but it was a start. I felt a glimmer of hope, a small victory in a sea of defeats. But as the trial date approached, Emily escalated her tactics. She began contacting my family, reaching out to old friends, digging into my past in an attempt to find anything she could use against me. It was a full-scale assault, and I felt the pressure mounting, the weight of her lies bearing down on me. The night before the trial, I received another message. This time, it was a video, a recording of Emily sitting in her car, smirking at the camera. She didn't say a word. she just held up a stack of cash, fanning it out with a satisfied grin. It was a taunt, a reminder that she had the means to keep this fight going indefinitely, that she could drag me through the courts for as long as it took to break me. But I was done being afraid. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the battle ahead. I fought too hard to back down now, and I wasn't about to let her win. The trial was brutal, a circus of accusations and counter-accusations. Emily played the part of the wounded victim perfectly, shedding crocodile tears as she recounted her version of events. But my lawyer was relentless, dismantling her story piece by piece, exposing her lies for what they were. We presented the evidence, the messages, the videos, everything that painted a clear picture of her deceit. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor, dismissing Emily's claims and awarding me damages for the emotional distress she caused. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was enough. I'd finally broken free from her web, severed the last ties that bound me to her toxic influence. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. I'd won, but the battle had left scars that would take a long time to heal. I'd lost friends, my reputation had been tarnished, and I knew it would be a while before I could fully rebuild my life. But I was free. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders, a sense of peace washing over me as I stepped into the sunlight. Emily had taken so much from me, but she couldn't take my resolve, my strength. I'd faced her wrath, endured her lies, and come out the other side. As I drove away from the courthouse, I glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the woman who had once held so much power over me. She was standing on the steps, watching me go, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. And in that moment, I knew I'd finally won. Emily would go on to find new victims, new people to manipulate, but she'd never have control over me again. I'd taken back my life, my dignity, and I was ready to move forward, leaving her and her twisted games in the past where they belonged.